I fully recorded like 3 minutes of me summing up everything I've read this month, and I completely forgot one of the books I'd read. Like, I didn't have it on the pile or anything. I don't know what that says about the impact that book had on me. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. So autumn is well and truly in full swing. We're in October now. I love autumn. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. So last week I received Natalie Haynes' new book, Divine Might, in the post. I had literally pre-ordered it back in like May, so it's been a long time coming, and I read it pretty much as soon as I got it. So I finished it yesterday. I loved it. I honestly think it's better than her first non-fiction book, and while I was reading it, I had an idea to maybe make this a bit of a challenge. Hello, it's November Liv here. I was just editing the video and I realised that I hadn't actually elaborated really on why I enjoyed Divine Might so much, so I thought I would just pop on and give you some more of my thoughts. So Divine Might is a series of studies of the portrayal of different Greek goddesses from ancient sources all the way through to modern day contemporary sources. And one of the things I really loved about this book was the sheer range in sources used, especially like ancient sources, because it would be quite easy to just kind of take the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Homeric hymns and maybe like a few Greek tragedies and just take those sources and use them as like your pool of information. But by doing that, you wouldn't actually be getting kind of the big picture of these deities in kind of Greek religion. And like, even I say Greek religion, but that would be still quite a generalization, because this religion was used throughout the ancient Mediterranean, and each area kind of had their own cult and their own different practices, and their version of a certain goddess may not necessarily be the same as the version that a different cult uses, and they might have different characteristics or have different festivals associated with them. So what you really need to do, and what Natalie Haynes does, is use kind of as wide a range of sources as possible, including like the really obscure, super fragmentary ones, so you're like literally piecing together as much information as possible from like these tiny little tidbits of sources from not very well known cults. Sorry, my phone ran out of storage, so I've had to empty my recently deleted folder, so best be quick. And then you also have like all of these modern day contemporary sources, and Natalie Haynes treats them just as seriously as the ancient sources. Like, for example, the opening to the chapter on the Muses, it starts off with her describing this like painting on a vase, I think, and she talks about it just like she is describing this kind of ancient vase that might be in like a museum or something. And then she does a complete 180 and is like, this is the opening to Disney's Hercules, and the muses on this vase are about to break into song. And I thought that was a fantastic opening. And that's another thing, like, this book is actually funny. Like, it is properly entertaining. I laughed out loud a good couple of times, and I don't tend to do that, especially when it comes to like non-fiction writing. I swear, if this book had come out a couple of years ago when I was researching for my master's dissertation, I would have actually enjoyed researching my master's dissertation. Like, reading academic books can be so mentally exhausting. And I swear, if other academics wrote their books the same way Natalie Haynes writes her non-fiction, like, it would be a game changer. I would have actually enjoyed doing my uni reading. So that was Divine Might by Natalie Haynes. I loved it. And I will hand you back over to October Liv so that she can get on with the video. So for the rest of October, I am going to be reading as many non-fiction books as I can, because I do have quite a few of them that I have just accumulated over the course of my degree or post my degree and just never got around to reading because I've never really been in the mood for non-fiction. But now is an excellent opportunity to get through some of that TBR, and honestly I'm kind of looking forward to reading something completely different to what I normally read. So we have just finished Divine Might, and I started today 2 books. I started Browse, Love Letters to Bookshops Around the World, and I also started I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. And I don't know which one I'm going to finish first, but when I do, I will give you my thoughts. Hello, so it's been just under a week and I finished both books, so let's talk about them. So first I finished Browse, Love Letters to Bookshops Around the World, and I enjoyed it. It's a book of essays written by 15 different authors about bookshops that have been formative to them at some point in their lives. And each essay is pretty short, very quick and easy to read, and a lot of them read kind of like memoir type short stories, which is really nice. The book as a whole really put into words and really articulated well the idea of the bookshop being a safe space for so many people for lots of different reasons. It's a place where people can come and learn or escape everyday life or even, plan a revolution. And I really liked the variety in the essays. They were written about all different kind of bookshops, like the big old foils on Charing Cross Road to like tiny little independent bookshops. And also I have only read one of the authors who have contributed to the book, but I do think that I'm gonna check out some of the stuff from some of the other authors. I do think that short story anthologies and essay collections are a really good way to discover unfamiliar authors to you, because you kind of can get a feel for an author's writing style without having to fully invest in what could be a very long book. So yeah, that was Browse. I really enjoyed it. Would recommend. And then I also finished I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. And again, I really enjoyed it. I'm really unfamiliar with the whole genre of like mental health, self-help type books. But it was actually really nice to read a book from the perspective of someone who doesn't seem like they have a lot of mental health problems on the surface, but that's just because they're really good at hiding them. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, and it's really nice to have one's feelings validated and know that you're not alone in feeling that way and that it does get better. Kind of similarly to Browse, the chapters were short and quick and easy to get through, and the point of each kind of chapter or subsection was expressed quite straightforwardly and there wasn't too much waffle. But again, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. Yeah, that was I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. I don't actually know yet what I'm going to read next, but I will check back in when I've finished another book. Hello! So I have just finished reading this book. This is The Heroine with 1001 Faces by Maria Tatar. And what do I think of this book? It was really interesting. It's basically a response to a book that was written in 1949 by this guy called Joseph Campbell, which is called The Hero with 1000 Faces. And in that book is this kind of model that's called The Hero's Journey. And it's a kind of representation of what a standard hero story would look like. And that model was then used by screenwriters in Hollywood for like decades, so that they could construct pretty much the perfect heroes for their films. But this book essentially asks, what about the women? And it's essentially this really in-depth, detailed study of female characters in stories ranging from ancient mythology and folk tales to films of like the late 2010s. Like, there is a massive range of
sources covered in this book. It's unreal. And this kind of massive range of sources used in this book does have its like pros and cons. On the one hand, it does really effectively get across the message that there is no one way for a woman to be a hero. To try and reduce the arcs of every single main female character in almost every single story ever written to one single model, like Joseph Campbell does in his book, is pretty much impossible, because there literally is no one way to be a heroine. There are so many different ways that women can do like heroic and transgressive deeds that make them stand out in what is historically a very male-dominated society. However, there are also two kind of main flaws in this kind of structure that is very much like you get this case study, and then you get this case study, and then you get this case study, kind of on and on and on. And there are chapters that are centered around a kind of theme, but within those chapters it kind of goes case study by case study, like one at a time. And the first thing is that it spoils a lot of like films and movies and stuff, and it's a pretty recent book. Like, this book came out in 2021. It discusses bits of media up until like 2019, 2020. So if you're like a bit scared of having things spoiled for you, like, it spoils the last season of Game of Thrones in like a paragraph. So if you haven't caught up on Game of Thrones just yet, I would avoid reading the last chapter of this book. Like, it didn't really matter for me because I don't mind spoilers that much, at least not for films or books or series that I'm like not emotionally invested in. But for example, for someone who has been meaning to read The Hunger Games for a while and has been living under a rock and has no idea what the plot is about, then this would very much spoil it for them, and yeah, that could suck for them. And the other thing is that it kind of makes the book feel a little bit repetitive and a bit dense in the way of prose. I felt like it took hours for me to read like 25 pages of this book. And this book, by the way, is less than 300 pages long, not counting like notes and indexes and stuff. So it really shouldn't have taken me as long as it did. But I think it's a combination of me having quite a low attention span when it comes to reading nonfiction, and also the fact that this book felt quite repetitive and yeah, just difficult to read, difficult to focus on, pretty much. I think the fact that it was repetitive and not that concise meant that the effectiveness of the messages that it was trying to get across through its like literary analysis was kind of lost. Like, it was kind of less effective. But like, it was still like super interesting, like really interesting, and I love reading about reception studies. It was a good book with some really interesting bits. What do I want to read next? I've got kind of 3 books that I want to read next. 3 physical books I want to read next. On my Kindle, I have a copy of Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which is what I want to start. But in terms of physical books, I have 3. I don't know if I'm gonna get through all of them in the month, but I'm gonna try. So I think I don't know what I want to read first, is the thing. So okay, I've got this one, You Will Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell, and I pre-ordered this book, and that was a long time ago, like a really long time ago, and I haven't read it. And today's like the 18th of October, so like a couple days now. Like, the other day, Dana Phil Games came back from hiatus, and it just transported me back to my teenage self. So I feel like now is the time. If I'm gonna read this book, now is the time for me to do so. So there's that. Then I've also got this very stunning, pretty little copy of What Writers Read, edited by Pandora Sykes. which is just a collection of essays by writers about their favourite book. I feel like it might be a little bit similar to Browse, which I read earlier this month and I enjoyed, so I want to read this. But then I also have this book, Fangirl, Scenes from Modern Music Culture, which I bought because I was like mesmerised by how shiny and beautiful the cover is. They say don't judge a book by its cover, but I did just that when I bought it. So I also want to read this, and yeah, it's more kind of feminism-y stuff, which I've been enjoying so far this month. So those are the 3 books. I haven't decided what I want to pick up next out of those 3. At some point in the future, I will get back to you with an update.
Hello! So the other day I finished reading Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge, and I thought it was fantastic. It was a really informative and eye-opening read. It goes into a lot of detail about Black British history, which we don't learn a lot about at school. At least I didn't learn like anything about specifically British Black history at school. What I learned about was very kind of US centric, about like the civil rights movement in the US. So there was a lot of information in the book that I had never really heard about, or had only heard about kind of in passing through like social media raising awareness of it. And then it also goes into a lot of detail about kind of the systemic racism in British society and how people of colour are naturally at a disadvantage because the people who made the rules in the first place were white people, mostly white men, who wanted to further their own interests at the expense of people who are not like them. And there were also sections on like intersectional feminism and the issues with like white feminism that don't like take into account the voices of women of colour. And to be honest, I'm not doing an amazing job of summing up this book. Just like read it. I think this book should be essential reading for anyone who wants to be a good ally. I thought it was great. It's not very long, it's very impactful, and yeah, read the book. And then once I finished Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, I had those 3 books to choose from, and out of those 3 books, I went and read something else. So this is Extracts from The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and I saw this in a bookshop, and it's a tiny little thing, and I thought, why not get it? Because I saw it next to like the big copy, like the main copy of the full Second Sex, all the volumes, all 800 pages. And although I wanted to read Simone de Beauvoir and like some other kind of classic feminist theory, 800 pages is just too much for me. I do not have the attention span. So this seemed a lot more digestible. And what this is a translation of the introduction to The Second Sex, one of the chapters on the independent woman, and then the conclusion of the book. And I think it was quite a good introduction to kind of classic feminist theory. There's a lot in here that is just kind of generally accepted by society nowadays about like the general sexism in society. Although when the book was first published, it was definitely met with like a lot of backlash and a lot of outrage, particularly from men. And I think it's also really cool how bluntly Simone de Beauvoir talks about like sex and periods and stuff in this book, which definitely would have been quite outrageous at the time, but it's quite refreshing to see it talked about so bluntly and directly in this book. Like, she doesn't shy away from the fact that women can, God forbid, have desires and have sex. There are definitely still parts of this book, because it was written in the mid-20th century, that are a little bit dated, particularly the part where she appears to imply that serious period pain is at least somewhat psychosomatic, and we know now from research that it is not. And you know, we're not here for medical gaslighting or anything, but there are also parts in here that like even now hit quite hard. Like, there's a whole kind of discussion about like, what is a woman? Is it like purely a biological thing? Is it a social thing? And Simone de Beauvoir states, like, it's on the blurb even, that one is not born but rather becomes woman. And I feel like that is a thing that conservatives need to hear nowadays. even if it's taken in a slightly different context. It's a thing that conservatives need to hear. So that was The Second Sex, or Extracts from the Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. And will I be reading the full version? No. 800 pages is too many. But I am glad that I read this. So next up, I am actually going to read one of the books that I said I would read. I'm going to read You'll Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell. And mostly I'm just kind of curious to see whether my sense of humour has evolved over the last 5 years. Like whether I'm actually going to connect with the way this book is written. Because I'm sure it will have been written in kind of the classic, like, dark humour, self-deprecation, like, you know, classic Dan is Not on Fire style humour. So I'm thinking it will either be a nice, fun, nostalgic reading experience, throwback to my teenage self, or it will be like a full-on cringe attack. But either way, I will let you know once I'm finished. So I have just finished reading You Will Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell. This is essentially a whistle-stop tour of different techniques and exercises and ways of thinking that can improve your mental health. And they're organised into sections depending on where your mental health is at that very moment, so that you can very easily flip to the right section and it will have an exercise, or it will talk you through how you might be feeling in that moment and how to change it for the better. So it's got a chapter if you're at a very low point and you just need a quick fix to tide you over to the next day. And it's also got chapters that will help you improve your mindset in the long term so that you can, in the future, avoid any other crises. Now, I pre-ordered this book back in 2021 and it has sat on my shelf, unread, for 2 years. And I am low-key kicking myself for not picking it up, because there's stuff in here that I definitely needed to hear over the course of that 2 years, and it's made me feel quite seen in a way that makes me wonder if Daniel Howell has been following me around with a clipboard, noting down when and where and why I have my mental breakdowns. Now, although this book has been written by YouTuber, comedian, entertainer, meme lord Daniel Howell, it has also been fact-checked by a qualified psychologist, Dr. Heather Bolton, who has lots of experience in treating mental health issues. So you can rest assured that the exercises in here are tried and tested, and the information in there is accurate, and it's not just one of those kind of celebrity-written self-help books that just kind of waffles. And I also like the fact that the way this book is written, although it deals with some really heavy topics, the tone is still quite lighthearted. I did originally wonder if that kind of sense of humour would not really hit with me anymore now that I'm like a grown adult. But what I think this book does really well is that it doesn't have that kind of preachy tone that a lot of self-help books do adopt. Like, it's very down to earth. And because it's told by someone who has gone through some really serious mental health issues himself and has come out on the other side of that, you do get the feeling that he knows what he's talking about when he says that things are going to get better. I think if I were to compare this book with I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki, I think that that book has kind of the message of your feelings are valid, whereas this book has the message of your feelings are valid. However, if you don't like how you're feeling, here's what you can do about that. It's kind of a little bit more practical. And honestly, I would recommend this book to anyone, I think, even people whose mental health isn't that bad, because there's probably stuff in here that will make you realise, hang on, I could change my mindset about this and therefore improve the way that I'm thinking. Because there is stuff in here that might change your way of thinking, or like change your mindset for the better and make you a little bit kinder towards yourself. So yeah, that was You Will Get Through This Night. It is currently the 30th of October. I have a little bit under 1.5 days of this challenge left. I have one more book that I want to read, and it's a very short one, so I'm confident that I will get through it either later today or definitely tomorrow. So I will get back to you with a conclusion to this video. Hello! Happy Halloween! I hope everyone is feeling nice and spooky. It's the last day of October, and I have finished reading today No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference, which is a collection of speeches by Greta Thunberg, the environmental activist, from 2018 when she started her school striking all the way up to 2020 and the start of the pandemic. And it's very short, very slim tome. It didn't take me that long to read, but it was still super impactful. I think Greta Thunberg is such an inspirational, iconic person. Like, she started her activism when she was like 15, 16 years old, and she was met with so much hate and vitriol, and yet she completely rolled with it, and she kept doing what she wanted to do, which was raising awareness of the climate crisis and bringing that to the attention of people in power, and like properly calling them out on behalf of like young people everywhere. And so reading this, besides making me feel incredibly anxious about the climate crisis, as it should, like it should make you feel anxious and worried and uncomfortable and panicky about the climate crisis. I mean, that's the whole kind of purpose of her activism. Like, she says in here that her speeches should make you panic. She wants people to panic about the climate because that means that they might actually do something about it. But besides that, it also made me feel a little bit sad that I'm sitting here at 23 years old and I've done fuck all with my life. And yeah, it's a collection of her speeches, and they do tend to get a little bit repetitive. Like, they're built off of the same kind of arguments, the same evidence, the same information used. However, that's kind of the point. Like, the whole reason she's having to repeat herself is because the people she's speaking to literally aren't listening to her. So she has to repeat herself. That's the whole point. But yeah, that was No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference. And I can't really say I enjoyed it because it did make me feel quite anxious about the environment, and that's the whole point. But what I will say is that it's very impactful, and I think you can tell more from reading the speeches rather than listening to them or watching them just how well written a lot of them are. She puts the information across really well, and she uses a lot of rhetorical devices and metaphors, and yeah, it's really powerful. I fully recorded like 3 minutes of me summing up everything I've read this month, and I completely forgot one of the books I'd read. Like, I didn't have it on the pile or anything. I just forgot it existed. So I don't know what that says about the impact that book had on me. But we are at the end of October, and that means we are at the end of this reading challenge. And I think it was quite a successful one. I believe I said at the start of this month that I was aiming for at least 3 books, and I have read 8 books. Hooray. Granted, a couple of them are pretty short, but I'm still counting that as a big win for me, and I feel super smart after reading non-fiction books for an entire month. So here we have all of the physical books that I read this month. We have on the top No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. We have extracts from The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. We have Browse, the essay collection. We have You'll Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell. We have The Heroine 1001 Faces by Maria Tatar, and Divine Might by Natalie Haynes. And then in terms of ebooks, we have I Want to Die But I Want to Eat tteokbokki by Bak Sahi. And then we also have Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. And that is 8 books. Yay. So I think my favourite book that I read this month was probably Divine Might. It set a very high bar for the rest of the month, I'm not gonna lie. It was just so interesting and engaging, and it like made me laugh, which not very many books can do, let alone non-fiction books. So it gets many points for that. Once again, Natalie Haynes can do no wrong. I do think Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race does come a very close second though, because it was just so eye-opening and informative, and I'm still kicking myself that I haven't read it before now. My least favourite book this month was probably The Heroine with 1001 Faces. Not because it wasn't interesting, because it was. It was just very difficult to get through. It felt so long, even though it actually isn't. It's quite short. And yeah, it did take a lot of mental energy to digest all of the information in that book. So for that reason, the reading experience wasn't the best for me, but it's still a really good book. Has this challenge made me want to read more non-fiction books in the future? Yes, absolutely. I want to keep being smart. Am I ever going to read non-fiction books for an entire month straight? No. No, I am clamoring for some mindless romance. And I don't think I have ever said that before, so that's an achievement as well. So yeah, that was the challenge. I'm gonna put these down now, they're quite heavy, those hardbacks. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have read any of the books that I read this month and you have any thoughts, please put them in the comments. If you have any recommendations for more non-fiction books that I should read at maybe a slower pace than I did this month, then put those in the comments as well. I love to get reading recommendations. If you want any more bookish content, feel free to subscribe here, please, I beg. Or you can head on over to my Instagram account or my TikTok account or even my Storygraph account, all at with Liv Jones, and you'll find a lot more bookish content on there. I update my Storygraph regularly, literally every day. Like, I have a over 200 day reading streak, possibly almost 250 day reading streak on there. So that's probably where you will see the earliest updates of what I am reading and what I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy. I hope you all have a lovely November. Hope it's nice and cozy and you're wrapping up warm for these longer nights. It's like 4:30 in the afternoon and it's already dark outside. I don't enjoy it. The seasonal depression is kicking in. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one. Bye!